Here's how to work the band for the Spring Blossom Cardi, and it can be used on other cardigans as well anytime you want. It's an extremely versatile band, and I'm actually showing you a variation of one I use often. Though in the first part of the video, you'll see how to accomplish the basics of the band, and then the second half of the video shows what's special about this particular application. I'm going to start by casting on 20 stitches. You do want an even number, but I am working here on my Studio 740 because the light is best here and it's a rainy day. It could be on any machine whatsoever, and you can cast on in any way you want, but very often I do recommend that you actually cast on and waste yarn and leave a good sized yarn tail. The reason being that you will then be able to bind off those open stitches and close the end of your band and make it perfectly match the band at the other end of the fabric. For a demo, it's not important that we make a perfect closure. I'm set at stitch size 6, so this is a yarn I would often knit at stitch size 7 because I like my band to be a little bit firmer. And I'm set to knit back from hold, and I will do that for a couple rows. It just almost always works better. Perhaps I should close the gate on the yarn door too. The thing is, after 2 or 3 rows, I'll be able to get a weight on those stitches so they stay out of mischief while I show you the remainder of the band. Okay, it's on there. It's not much weight. This is really quite light. It's just like putting maybe 3 claw weights on, but it's a one-piece thing and it's neat. And from this point, we just knit. However, every few rows, and this is about enough, we need to stop, ladder down one center stitch and reform it as a purl. I'm using 20 stitches in total here, and you always would want to use an even number, and you'll see why in a minute. There's the 10th one. I'm going to ladder it down, one that is very close to the true center, but of course you don't have a true center when you have an even number. Now if you ladder all the way down to the E-wrap, it will unwrap. That's okay. I can just pick up that strand of yarn, make a twist in it, and now begin latching up. So now I'm making purl stitches. If you have a ribber, you can of course place this one stitch on the ribber. However, it's really probably easiest to do by manually reforming since it's just one stitch. If you use the ribber, you're going to need additional weight, ribber comb, etc. But it's your call. It doesn't matter. What we're trying to do is create a ridge right up the center, nearly the center of the band. And that's going to be a spot to fold it on. So you go on doing what I just did until the band is as long as you want it to be. Okay, you've got to make sure to drop the same one. I should be able to put my tool into where the last purl stitch was formed, and just continue up the ladder, reforming my purls. So when I'm done with this column of purls, that will be enough for the demo, and I will go off camera and bind off. You don't need my help with that. But if by chance you do need my help with that, I have whole videos on the subject of various bind-offs. This is the first step. We just knit the band with one very slightly off-center purl stitch. It will be important to us to know which is the slightly wider side that has 10 whole stitches and which one really has 9 because we turned one into a purl stitch. I marked the 9-stitch side so that I can keep track of it with that little yarn marker. The darker pink is my pretend cardigan front. So I wrap my band around the edge of it so that our purl column will fall right at the edge of the fabric or just at a slight distance from the edge so that it'll make a sharper crease. There's my marked area, so I know I'm correct. I'm going to put some pins in here to hold it. I don't always use pins, but this one is rolling magnificently, so that's one good reason to do so. And also it's going to make it easier for me to let you get a good view. Now this edge is really roly-poly, the one that's encased, and we don't want it to stay that way. So the first thing to do is force it to unroll, and we'll baste this from the inside of the garment with a line of stitching that's meant to hold the rolling edge flatter. If this were a real garment, I would probably leave this line of stitching forever because it is behaving in such a rambunctious way. So if that's the case, you want the stitches to be neat enough and matching enough that you're not going to mind that. Those pretty much disappeared. These earlier ones didn't. So if this were real, I would snip that, take it out, and redo them. Do it so that the entire length was stitches that really hide, and I would not mind it. I've got it pinched with my thumb to stop that rolling at the moment. Here's how you make a stitch that won't show. Make sure you only go over 1 bar of yarn. You can maybe go under 2 and over 1, but you only want to go over 1. Let me get that a little bit. If I'm a little bit farther from the camera, you seem to get better focus, so I'll do that again while we finish this. Down, up only 1 stitch away, down, up, down, up. If my experience with a particular yarn combo tells me that after I steam it, it's going to behave itself, I just baste and pull it out later. And so for that, I would use bigger stitches in a contrasting color. Now, in this case, I don't really have a whole cardigan band on here. It's not going as far down the length of a whole sweater. I just made a big swatch for the pretend sweater. Get this yarn tail out of the way because it wants to play and we don't want it to. Okay, that's holding the edge flat. That's what we want. This row of stitching that's upcoming can actually be made on the sewing machine if you want to. I don't really want to, and it can be a row of running stitches like this, which is certainly the fastest way to do it, or it can be whip stitches. If you're doing it on the sewing machine, unroll ahead of yourself and let the machine run down there. Let's do a few whip stitches and compare. We do not have to concern ourselves with the fact that the thread that matches the band won't match the cardigan front very well in this case because they're different. And I'm stitching all the way through. And as it happens, you really can't see it in this instance anyway. But if you could, it would not matter. because that's the reason that we made the outer edge of the band a little bit wider. It'll cover whatever I do here. Okay, I went back to running stitches, but you can compare. In all honesty, I think whip stitches hold it down a little more tightly, but running stitches look a little neater. And it may vary with the specifics of the yarn and your skill history and how your grandma taught you. It's not too important. If you're getting a neat result that does not distort the cardigan edge, you're fine. Now, I'm folding the band now to the outside, the right side of the cardigan, putting a couple pins in place. Again, I don't always use pins, but they will allow you to check and make certain that this column of stitches is right on the edge where you want it to be. And that's pretty important because that is what makes a neat, sharp-looking cardigan band edge. And now we stitch this edge down, and it's going to show. So try to get it perfectly aligned with a column of stitches. I mean a column of stitches on the main fabric, in this case the fuchsia darker pink fabric. Again, this can be done either by hand or machine, or you can baste it on by hand and then follow up by machine. By the way, I know there are people who think that it's one of the reasons Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, this sewing on the sewing machine of knits, but I've done a lot of Bible study. I don't think that's right at all. Seriously, if you want to use all your tools, use them. If you don't, and you're a real purist, that's fine with me too. Just don't get too worried about it. I don't think it's one of life's bigger issues. At this point, you could be done. This could be the end of the sweater. Of course, would be up to the neck and down to the hem, but this could be the process of putting on the band. And you might want to just steam it to finish it up. But for the cardigan pictured, there are a couple more steps. We're going to use some more of the band yarn to further sharpen up the edge. This one came out looking quite nice and crispy, just as with what we've done. What I did there is pull through the loop, and now I can pull the yarn tail behind me. That's just to get started. Into the fabric, right next to the one purl stitch that we hand formed. Pull up. In next to the next one up, make a loop. So we're making a row of chain stitches. And when I've done a few more of them, I'll show you how it certainly reinforces the edge, and it can sharpen it up. It also gives you a valuable opportunity. If you did not want to build buttonholes in, but you want buttonholes, stop at any point where you want one. Chain a certain number of chains. I should have counted so I could make them match, and I did not. And then resume working up the side. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's either 8 or 9. So we'll pretend like we know and do a few more stitches and then another buttonhole. This is how the Spring Blossoms cardigan was finished. And that was a great use of this band because I was using a self-patterning yarn you cannot make the fronts narrower than the back. As in other words, we normally do the back as half of the cardigan circumference and each front as a quarter of the cardigan circumference. But I was using a self-patterning yarn. And in that case, if the fronts were a quarter of the circumference, in other words, half of the width of the back, the stripes on them would be twice as wide. And that wasn't the look I wanted. I wanted the front and the back to match. Fairly close. However, I didn't anchor it very neatly. Let me try that again. So cut and sew for the cardigan under discussion is an essential finish, whether it's something you love or not. That's the way to get all the pieces to look alike. Therefore, I knitted the front like the back, trimmed the neckline as per the design I had in mind, and then knitted this band. And in fact, I did serge the edges on the sample of the cut front. But once enclosed in this edge, you can get by without it. Also, if you don't have a serger, it's kind of crazy to buy one just for that purpose. And zigzagging will do the job, but it doesn't ever look quite as neat and pretty. However, nobody gets to see inside this band, as you can see. So that's a perfect use of the tight enclosure, tight and complete, that this kind of band gives to a cardigan. And we're nearly done. So now we've reinforced the edge, made it even sharper than that single purl stitch, and added button loops. It's a several-step process, but nothing is difficult, and I think it's so worth the effort.